tonight's presentation by the artist initiatives. We had 11 artist initiatives, and we thank you all for being here, because today is 13th and I know everyone is really busy, but you made it and you are here. Now I'll welcome Kathryn Weir. She is the Director of Cultural Development from Centre Pompidou, Paris. She will share about her experience of collectives and also her experience that she gathered here. I'll welcome her now on this.
So first of all, really I feel that I'm not so much here to present today. I was very honored to be able to hear all of you. I'm here as someone in dialogue, but really I gained an enormous amount of knowledge of this very, very rich kind of landscape of practices and organizations and initiatives that are existing all over the country. So thank you to Diana and the Samdani Art Foundation, and particularly thank you to all of you for sharing the history of what you've been doing, the vision, philosophy, and your thoughts about the future. If it's possible to bring the lights up a little, it would be better so that I could see you a little more. But what I have on the images, which will be just scrolling through, I'm not going to speak to them so directly, but they are related to a research project that I have been doing, which is why Diana thought to, thank you, that's good, to introduce me, to invite me at this time, and so to introduce me to all of you. And you know, to be here, I guess, at this moment when all of your different processes and platforms, projects, now coming together into a network, and more connections will be created than already exist, and new energy and dynamism kind of will be generated, new possibilities for collaboration between collectors is very exciting as well, to kind of see what's going to happen in the next stage of that. So I've been, for the last couple of years, researching in many different places, histories of, I guess, this generation of collective practice and collaboration and artist-run initiatives. Some locations have very kind of rich histories and presence around collaboration. So, you know, I spent particularly some time in Colombia, in Indonesia. I've also, you know, been to certain places in Africa. There are many artist collectives happening there. Where, in some cases, the research that I've done with a number of colleagues has been has not involved research trips, but wherever possible, either curators have gone and done research on the ground and met people and had discussions, because I think that's fundamental. In other cases, artists have come to Paris, and part of the research project or platform has been to start up a ongoing collaboration with a residency location in Paris called the Cité Internationale des Arts, which is not far from the Pompidou Center. So we've been able to invite certain members of collectives, certain artists to Paris for these micro-residencies where we've learned more about their activities, and they've also done research on the ground in Paris. And this is feeding a platform called Cosmopolis, which is responding to artistic practices focused on research based in a particular location that feeds the activities of knowledge sharing or the kind of creation of different new types of events or schools. We've seen many examples of festivals or discussion, discourse-based practices in different parts of the world. So these kind of practices that are less about the creation of objects and more about the creation of relationships and about knowledge sharing in different forms. So Cosmopolis really points to how today there's a very strong phenomenon of the linking of those practices which are based in particular situations internationally through networks, obviously facilitated by new communications technology, but not only, to look for ways of having international conversations that start from specifics and then find either resonances in other places or modes of translation, cultural translation, so that we're not simply talking about specifics but having the possibility of a dialogue about issues. And I think you have to also place this in the context of artists being receivers and transmitters of the questions that come to the fore in different societies at different times, and the current climate of the generation of fear through the international media or in different places, related to migration or related to the rise of religious fundamentalism and so on. So I think that artists are very strongly offering different strategies for encountering difference and for creating the possibility of communication going beyond fear. So it's Cosmopolis in that sense of a global village creating communication rather than separation, and empathy rather than fear. This is happening more strongly, I would say, between Asia, South America, Africa, than particularly between Europe and America, which is not to say there aren't collectives who are also working that way. In Europe and America there are, but it's a less marked phenomenon, and particularly in, I guess, the art institutions, there's a real attachment to forms of telling art history and how you get to contemporary art that are still based on a history of forms and a history of modernism in Europe and America. So there are so many other discussions going on that are really less visible or less responded to in Europe. So the platform for me was a way of trying to have, where I'm located currently, catch up a little bit with these other conversations that are really more dynamic elsewhere, but are, fundamentally where true art practice is located today, rather than in this continuation of the history of forms. So that's the broader kind of why I'm here. I've been in the Centre Pompidou for almost 3 years, and before that I was based in Brisbane in Australia at the Gallery of Modern Art. So I did travel quite a bit in the region at that time, doing research for the Asia Pacific Triennial. Haven't been to Bangladesh before, so very glad to have made it here. this time. And I think then the other thing to say maybe about that kind of research process in curating or in art practice, and a number of you touched on it today, is this position of openness and curiosity that doesn't know where it's going, that doesn't set out saying the objectives is here and this thing, but how I'm going to get there, but rather sets up a process and is comfortable with that sense of not necessarily knowing what you're going to learn along the way and where that's going to lead. So, I think that sense was very palpable in a number of presentations here. It's something that I tried to build into my research in this platform, which is based at the Pompidou Center, which is a complete anathema to a French art institution. So it's been a kind of difficult process trying to keep that sense of not knowing and openness to different outcomes that emerge through the discussions and the research. Yes. I guess that's about Cosmopolis. I wanted to also say, in terms of the research I've been doing and other collectives and artist initiatives elsewhere, and I mentioned a couple of times in my just responses to individuals today that the question of sustainability, so how, at a certain point an initiative or collective doesn't run out of steam because everyone is doing too many things and it takes too much energy just to deal with the logistical issues of running a space or running an event or coordinating communication or whatever it is. So there are different types of solutions that are being generated in different places. I mean, they often do fundamentally involve the creation of networks of collectives so that certain things can be done, so that there are appropriatenesses of scale. I was going to say economies of scale, but it's not necessarily economic, but certain things happen better with a smaller group or are more defined around a particular interest, and then other things when you have a number of different collectives who are dealing with the same issue at one level come together, makes it easier to find solutions for everyone that will suit a bigger group and let everyone get on with what they were doing. So this is clearly this kind of initiative of creating this forum and the other kind of aspects of what will happen between the initiatives who are involved in this, I think will be a very useful thing. Those things obviously happen in more organic ways, but it just increases the possibility and frequency of the conversations, the communication towards that. So, if I give a couple of examples, I was going to mention an international network called Arts Collaboratory that was set up about 10 years ago now, I think, funded by a couple of NGOs in the Netherlands that were looking at artists' initiatives all over the world, and created this quite extraordinary network and funded travel and meetings and created a very interesting conversation internationally. And after a certain period, they're basically moving over to not funding those original members, and the original members also don't really want to be in a hierarchical relationship anymore with a funder to whom they have to respond in some ways, ticking boxes because those funders are responding to the Dutch government or whatever. So they kind of created a new flat structure where the funders are deciding if they'll continue to be a member, but not in that kind of funding capacity. And then the members set themselves these kind of working groups around sustainability and mentoring relationships also amongst the network to look at their next period and what the issues were in not only financial, but also, you know, fundamentally, where did they want to be and why were they doing what they were doing. So that's been very successful. And then on one of those members, one of the members of Arts Collaboratory, who's taken a really big role within it, Ruang Rupa in Jakarta, they, as part of, you know, developing out of that reflecting and out of their kind of role within the ecology of collectives that is very strong in Jakarta and Indonesia in general, have in the last year created this new space in Jakarta that has taken over a warehouse space of one of the kind of key historical department stores in Indonesia, Sarina, and there are, you know, a group of collectives that are now running that space, but also have a kind of business model that'll let the rent be paid and share, you know, certain forms of equipment and be involved in, you know, collaborating on certain events and so on. So they do that thing of both maintaining, you know, a scale that's manageable of individual collectives and different priorities, and then coming together to address certain issues. I think that's all I really need to say, but I thought maybe some of you may be interested in opening up questions or making comments, I guess. I haven't really spoken to the images behind me. They're examples of some of the collectives who I've been working with in Cosmopolis. These are collectives that we see images from, who will have proposed work after doing micro-residencies in Paris, whose work, you know, involves that kind of thinking about, if I'm going to exhibit somewhere, then I need interlocutors on the ground who will tell me what the important questions are, or how we translate our questions into this context, so they're not exotic, but they have a real resonance here. So these projects that you're seeing are examples of ones that will be shown in the first exhibition associated with Cosmopolis, which will be from October to December this year in Paris. It is focusing on collectives and collaboration, and it will also include within the exhibition a school and a library. So Ruang Rupa is creating a research space, a library with physical books and online resources, and they're parasiting the Pompidou Centre to do that. They're kind of taking resources from the Pompidou, from recent exhibitions, and making everything kind of by using the institution. And then there's a central school space that includes every week a thematic program with actually a reading group, and then a keynote speaker on a Wednesday night, a Thursday night discussion roundtable and/or film screening, Friday night performance, and particularly looking at how music embodies forms of knowledge and cultural history, and then another dialogue with a curator on the weekend, and then some artist-led visits to the show. And we're collaborating with a number of art schools as well, and bringing in students to within the space. So the presence of artists and members of the public and other, you know, collectives from Paris will be very strong within that space. And we'll also have another edition of Cosmopolis in Shanghai in April 2018 that evolves that edition with some of the same artists, but rethinking the work for Shanghai, and then including some other collectives, and also another dimension of looking at the history of artist collectives in China since around 1989. And then there will be, you know, it is an ongoing platform, so it does, you know, have ongoing discursive events and publications and there will be other editions in the future focused around different issues. I mean, I think artist research is at the core of the concept of Cosmopolis, but as I said, this first edition is particularly looking at collaboration, collective strategies. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
Anyone has any questions?
About collective activities around waste and the environment. They're going to come and they're not going to listen to anything anyone has to say until they see garbage or waste. It's like you come in with a preconceived idea of what you're looking for and you're blind to everything else. So in a way, I think some of the best exhibitions that happen come from this place of I don't know. So you come somewhere that inspires you for some reason, you look and you find something that you might not expect. So that's also what we really try to do at the summit, because if we brought people here that already know what they think about Bangladesh, you're going to see a show about rickshaws and Rana Plaza and kind of all the things that people, expect. So that I think has been a problem with some of the South Asian shows in the West. Some of the critique is that that's basically what's happening. So what we're trying to do with all of these research fellows that we're bringing are bringing people who have very open minds, and we have no clue what's going to come out of this. But we're hoping that by making the right choice of people who have these opportunities and interests, and we have the confidence that the work that you guys are doing is extremely strong, that something can come out of it. And I guess a question I have for you is, maybe could you tell us a bit about some of the collectives who maybe have models that might be inspiring for some of the collectives that you've heard about here?
And Arquitectura Expandida are doing a long residency in Paris. We're actually working with Clichy-Montfermeil, which is a kind of far-flung suburb of Paris, very badly served by public transport, so it takes an hour and a half at least to get to the center of Paris, if not more, from there. It has a very kind of a community that results from the kind of post-war migration from ex-French colonies, so highly North African and some sub-Saharan African, highly there's the biggest market for that kind of area of Paris there as well. And it's also an area that was came to national visibility when there were huge riots in 2005, reacting to the death of two adolescent boys whose families were of Algerian background, and they're French-born kids, but who ran away from police officers who they assumed would violently harass them because that was their experience, the experience of their families. They'd done nothing wrong, the boys, and they hid in an electrical turbine and died. And the riots that followed it are kind of often pointed to as a sparking point for the beginning of a very long and slow process of France maybe starting to, in some ways, address its colonial history, but it really is a very slow process. And the fact that populations are not equal in front of French institutions, and there's very systematic racism and violence. So, there's still a French ideology of the school system being free and equal for all, and it's the social escalator and everyone can get up there. But in fact, of course, in everyone's experience, it's not at all the same, either of school or of the police or of the justice system and so on. So that area, I guess, has played that key role. Arquitectura had already a relationship with a high school in that area where they were doing a project with some other architects that are based there. So there was an existing relationship. We don't know yet what they're going to do there. They've done a first period of residency and looked at what the issues were for the people there. That's what I was going to say also before when Diana was speaking, is the process of research has to involve that not knowing or openness, because how can you know before you have the conversations what's important to people in a particular place, or what kind of practice is important. And so they're interested in the idea of the commons and kind of top-down planning, which is very strong in France compared to other possibilities for inserting different things into the urban space. And then we'll also show some elements relating to their work of video, and probably some cartography and objects in the exhibition at the Pompidou Center. We seem to have stopped on that image. Do you want to go back? Chimurenga from South Africa, Cape Town. They're a publishing platform. They publish something called The Chronic. They've just had an issue come out on food ethics and kind of, the images of food in Africa in particular, and redressing that, agriculture and kind of projected images. They also have very interesting strategies for research collecting and archiving. So they have their main publication, The Chronic, which is online and print. Then they have something called the Pan-African Space Station, which is like at the other end of the schedule of getting to a chronic, where they may have identified a certain area as of interest, and so they land as this radio station in a particular location, often a library, because that has a very broad demographic, but not necessarily. And there's a period of a week or whatever it is when the Pan-African Space Station broadcasts from that place, invites a whole lot of people in who will take part in the discussions and performances and so on that are broadcast. Those people are also then there as resources in a conversation around that topic. They're identifying, issues and strategies for dealing with them around a particular area, or areas of interest for research. They've done past projects about Islam in Africa, the history of Islam in Africa, about comics. They're very interested in the low frequencies of culture, what goes through kind of non-validated artistic forms like comics. And all of that material is broadcast, live across Africa and around the world, obviously. And then all of the material is archived, made accessible, and feeds into the definition of new research topics and publications. Rangrupa, who I already talked about. These are some examples of some of the ways that they've worked in the past and the kinds of installations they create. They're doing also a cart. You can see a video cart over here for Cosmopolis in Paris that will have a DJ setup and capacity for karaoke, but also video projection that can be moved around to different areas of the space. So they'll do, programming, live music, and karaoke using the cart. And as I said, they're creating a library space within the exhibition that will also archive what happens in the programming space in Cosmopolis. Mix Rice from Seoul are presenting this project, Plant Graffiti, which was the outcome of long-term research undertaking in Seoul about where they were mapping both. They've done a lot of work on migrant communities in Seoul. They're also looking at new urban development and then migrations of plants and how 1,000-year-old trees were being moved around between construction sites and kind of upper-class new urban developments, and really mapping these trees as individuals that were migrating as a result of urban transformation as well. Art Labor from Vietnam, a collective of a couple of artists and a curator, presenting a cafe where they serve Vietnamese Robusta coffee, which was introduced by the French colonists, and large areas of land in the hills were taken over to coffee, alongside other kind of large-scale cash crops. There'll be a new video work called Jarai Ju that looks at, it's double channel and looks at that kind of industrial agriculture alongside a piece that's based on a cosmological myth of the people, Jarai people, who one of the members belongs to, who live in this area where the coffee, too many ways of saying coffee, cultivation has taken over from the original kind of moving subsistence farming. So looking at relationship to land and making those worlds meet. Iconoclastistas from Argentina do have a practice research base that involves a lot of cartographic workshops where they will both teach different forms of mapping to groups of people who are mapping their experience in a part of a city, for example, and then they themselves have longer term mapping projects. This is a poster that they'll produce, which will be a stack in the space so the audience can take a copy, that looks worldwide at the relationship between women and farming and colonial histories. Council, who is a French collective of... Oh, so have people met them? Gregory and Sandra came? Okay. Okay, great. So maybe you also know this project, the Against Nature project. Maybe they talked to you about it? Just starting, okay. So should I talk about it or not? But quickly, so it's a long duration project they're working on to create in different locations where this legal clause called the Against Nature clause, which derives originally from European jurisprudence and different traditions, but has been removed in Europe, has been part of a colonial legacy in different parts of the world, and is today still used to convict people, often to death, for unnatural practices, which can go from hand-holding to homosexuality and so on. And so their project is to produce a journal in collaboration with a really wide multidisciplinary group of people, going from artists to lawyers, urban planners, and so on, that think about what kind of resources they can give to judges so that they are able to base their non-conviction inability to convict on that basis on these resources, these elements. So they will make this journal. The journal will be hand-delivered to judges it's basically a country-by-country project. And then they have ways in which that project can also be shown in an art context through the works of artists who are associated with it, or also examples of cases from different places. Yep. Maybe Tentative Collective also from Pakistan. Yeah. So they're doing a new project about waste as the underside of modernity, the kind of unspoken dark side, looking at the circulation of waste around the world in those big containers.
So when this Cosmopolis started, what were the key objectives of this, may I say, exploratory research on artist collaborative around the globe or in the global south, as I got information from Samdani Foundation? So what were the things that you guys were primarily looking at when you started the program? And from your experience over the last 3 years working on it, could you identify already any pattern or anything particular that is common in different regions, in different socio-cultural contexts? And I have another question about the programs and exhibition department that you do it, is how these knowledge that are being gathered from these kinds of exploratory research, how this knowledge is like being utilized or being disseminated in the arts management or policy level. So that's the two things I would like to know. Thank you.
So, the first question, if I understand rightly, is about the research that we've done over the last couple of years. Did you ask both about the objectives, why we set it up that way, and also how that's disseminated? So, as I kind of briefly said, really the project I designed as a way of trying to help France catch up on some conversations that were mainly happening elsewhere, without saying that it's global south, because that objectifies once again, but just saying that in certain cities, artistic scenes, and in the networks created between those, which are often south-south, there is a real kind of strength of certain kinds of conversations happening. But there are examples like council or working with another collective, Foundland, who are Amsterdam-based, although it is an Egyptian and a South African woman who are doing that. I haven't mentioned them. But, you know, there are many examples within Europe and within North America also of this kind of process, but it's less strongly represented in practice, and it's certainly also still less strongly reflected in what institutions are showing and doing, or what is being talked about in art conversations. So, you know, at the one hand, I did already have this sense from my work previously, you know, in Asia particularly, but also in Africa and South America, for the institution in Australia where I was working, that these conversations were very strong elsewhere and not so strong in Europe. And so, given that I was moving to that region, I wanted that region of Europe to be able to open itself up to multi-regional conversations and not think of itself as a center and a hermetic kind of conversation. Then, really, what in terms of the way that is shared, I also, with the curators who've been working with me, wanted to make the process collaborative in itself, in the way that information was shared with artists who are involved in it, so they know what other artists are doing, and there's the possibility of people collaborating, you know, within, which is also happening on the school and on the programs and so on. We're working on an online platform that will put information about all of the projects in this first edition of Cosmopolis that I would have liked to have up and running earlier. In fact, we've really verbally been sharing information because of resources we weren't able to get that up and running, say, at the beginning of this year, and have it for artists and curators to share information in the first instance and then make it kind of broader. But that was the idea. But hopefully, you know, by mid-year that will be up and running, and then some parts of that will continue to evolve with certain artists who will blog or post things or comment, across the platform. And then there will also be a print publication, but that won't happen until the time of Cosmopolis in Shanghai. So at a later stage, that will include reference to discursive events as well as those 2 exhibition events. And then we're in discussion to work with a number of universities on a research platform that would be ongoing in parallel as well, about focused on artist research. I mean, there are a couple of, that's been another quite hot topic in recent years, and there's been some interesting discussion on it and on how it tends to be kind of recuperated by the knowledge economy, where artists just become, another form of knowledge producer, but that's meant to fit into that existing system. And how do you look at the specificity of that type of research by not translating it into academic articles or presentations, but insisting on the practice-based nature of it that has to be represented through practice. So that would, in a nutshell, be kind of the core of that research project. Then is that the first question, more or less? Is by any other? As I understand it, I'm going to restate it again, was how the kind of knowledge collected through this may actually be fed into the arts administration. So do you mean like how it may have some be activated to transform institutions or administration? Not as crazy as that, did you say?
I was referring to how these in knowledge is shaping future program designing. That was where I was trying to go. Yeah.
Within my department of the Pompidou Center?
Right.
Okay. All right. So just to explain the department, because it's got this strange title that no one understands, cultural development, that's meant to really mean the future developments of art practices, to be, to prospect, to research what directions is going, respond to new types of forms of artistic practice. It's also a department that focuses on multidisciplinary work, on social questions, on how artists are those kind of motors for very different lateral ways of digesting and thinking about the questions that are coming up. And so there are some exhibitions and festivals and events that cut across all areas of the department, but then there are also curators and programmers of moving image and performance and spoken word in different forms, and another area called art and society, arts and societies actually. So I think it feeds in the most broad terms into the programs in the sense of the artists who come and the residencies. A very important part of that is the conversations that happen where, again, you don't know what the outcomes might be, but already just the fact that those curators and programmers in that department are meeting artists from all over the world, where there tends to be quite a Eurocentric focus in the programming, can begin to change the conversations. Making friends from elsewhere so that you decenter your conversations, you have an awareness of what's happening in other places. Rung Rupa have this great quote that I like to use, which is, don't make art, make friends. The most important thing is that you have kind of new relationships and new perspectives, and that those are ongoing, and you see where they lead. So I don't think I can really be more specific than that. There are other parts of the program, that I will feed and other people feed from the research. So I've thought of, there's, for example, one festival of performance. It's like the core of it is moving image, and then it's goes to performance, and it has a thematic focus each year. And it's really the curator who started that festival 10 years ago wanted to look at how the moving image was moving out of cinemas but into all sorts of other practices. That's called hors piste, which means off the beaten track. And there are people that I've met here who I will definitely put in contact with that curator, and so that also, at a very basic level, just feeds into programming and expands that internationally as well. We have seasons of performance, so from September through to May, live arts, a lot of dance, performance art, and some theatre, the kind of focus of that, and music also. And for cinema, we do like a couple of exhibitions associated with retrospectives. The cinema today, and it's gone over different stages in different periods of the Pompidou's history, is really focused on individuals who renew cinematographic language. So it doesn't do national cinema or really many thematic programs at all, but it's mainly individual filmmakers who may also work in photography or video installation and so on. So there'll be a couple of, as I said, like exhibitions associated with the retrospective, and then a couple of just straight retrospectives. They always have a lot of spoken word and workshops associated with them as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Patient. So the first study tour is going to happen this summer to Documenta in both Athens and Kassel, and then to Munster Sculpture Project. And there'll be future things, before this initiative started, we had a program in Kochi, so just look forward to this over 3 years. And please stay in touch if you guys have any ideas, and please keep Ruxmini in the loop. And this forum was done in English primarily because we had Kathryn as our visitor, we had me, I couldn't understand if you guys didn't do this in English. And Emma is working on a guide where we will have all of these write-ups about what you're doing, which you can share widely as well. And we will also put the clips of these presentations online. So basically there's a lot of people who are interested in what you're doing, and we're just trying to open up those avenues so you can make new friends. And on that note, let's go enjoy the new year. Thank you everyone for your time today. And thank you so much to Ruxmini, and to Emma, and to Sajjad, and to my team, and to Kathryn for being here with us.